Is everybody in? Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Bit of housekeeping before we start. I came up with the idea for this show at about 4 o'clock this morning. I'd heard about the demise of Blucon Demolition, and that news came just 24 hours after we reported on the collapse of Wooldridge Contracting. As a result of those two being back to back, I couldn't sleep. So I quickly hatched a plan to discuss the current state of the UK demolition sector. I've pulled together some notes and a few images to illustrate those notes as well. But in truth, I'd much prefer this to be a conversation rather than a monologue. However, with that being said, I am going to start with a monologue that will hopefully set the scene, raise a few more discussion points, and bring you up to speed on precisely why I believe this show is necessary. I will get to your comments just as soon as I've delivered the opening part, but I'm going to say a few good afternoons to Andy Darvell, to Dan Cullen, to Mark Whiting, to Gary Muirhead, and to Mick Saunders as well. Gentlemen, I will be back with you in just a moment, but we need to start with, as I say, my monologue, such as it is. On the 23rd of October last year, we reported that Squibb Group was on the brink of collapse. Just a few weeks later, the company finally went under with debts approaching £24 million. On the 16th of November last year, we reported that McCormack Demolition had suffered precisely the same fate. 2 days ago, we shared the news that Wooldridge Contractors had also appointed administrators, and then just this morning, we brought you the exclusive news that Solihull-based Blucon Demolition had suffered precisely the same fate. Now, in the interest of clarity, that wasn't the order in which the reported collapse of the four companies actually took place. But liquidations, insolvencies, administrations generally take place far from the glare of the media. So they may have actually happened in a slightly different order. Furthermore, the collapse of a company doesn't generally happen overnight. It's usually the culmination of months or even years of financial struggles that eventually drag the firm below the surface. But whatever the cause and whatever the sequence, the loss of 4 demolition companies in 3 months is unprecedented. I've looked back at our reporting during the 2008-2009 recession, which was supposedly the longest and deepest recession in living memory. Yes, we did lose a few companies, and we've lost more since, but not so many, and certainly not in such quick succession. And good afternoon to Chris Ford. Now, I'm going to take that off the screen. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of all this, let me tell you that the sequence of these collapses is generally the same, at least as far as we're concerned here at Demolition News. The process always starts with rumour and speculation, normally from a competitor or a local rival. There's talk of unpaid bills, disgruntled employees and people jumping ship, of CCJs and of winding up orders. Now, we don't report on those because at that point, they are merely speculation. And I can tell you that for every company that does go under, I've been told about the worrying signs at a further 10 or 20. And generally, those worrying signs amount to nothing more than rumour or mischief making. But in those instances where there is a genuine financial frailty, one rumour becomes 2, 2 becomes 4. And pretty soon, every phone call, text, and WhatsApp message I receive is predicting an imminent demise. When the collapse finally happens, we generally get messages from 2 main sources. We get we get tales of creditors that have been led to believe that any financial issues were short-term glitches, that all was fine, and the company just needed a little bit more time. And we get messages from former employees that tell tales of first-class director travel to far-flung destinations, of expensive car collections, and of footballer lifestyles. Now, for the record, even the most successful demolition contractor cannot truly afford a footballer's lifestyle. A good footballer will be earning 200, 300, or even £400,000 per week. That money comes in during the playing season and during the close season. It comes in whether they're playing well or playing poorly, and it comes in whether they're fit or whether they're injured. And for many elite footballers, the money they earn from football is far outweighed by sponsorship deals and image rights and that kind of thing. Footballers don't have to deal with fluctuations in market demand for their services. They don't have to fixate on scrap prices. They're not just as good as their last game, even if they've have a terrible game or a run of games that means that they're benched or dropped entirely. They will continue to rake in that weekly wage. Now, I know I'm getting off topic here, and the topic we're actually here to discuss is quite simply this. Is demolition an industry in crisis? Well, with 4 firms failing in just 3 months, it certainly feels like it. But before we actually answer that question in any real depth, let's take a look at the biggest of the failures, Squibb Group. Squibb Group reported that their problems stemmed from shifts in scrap prices and from the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent lockdown. Now, both of those factors may have contributed to the untimely demise of McCormack, Wooldridge, and Blucon as well, although the more industrial nature of Squibb's demolition activities may be placed at the mercy of unfavourable moves in scrap prices rather than more than the other 3. That being said, COVID and scrap price fluctuations would have impacted the whole sector, and there's another 500 odd firms out there that are still fighting the good fight. My personal feeling, however, is that the demise of these 4 companies was caused not by scrap prices, nor by the COVID lockdown, and nor was it caused, in Squibb's case, by the £2 million fine imposed by the Competition and Markets Authority. None of those factors will have helped, but in my opinion, they were not the cause. The truth is that for many years now, the UK demolition companies have worked on unsustainable single-digit margins that have left many of them increasingly vulnerable to even the slightest shift in workloads. Since COVID, we've seen marked rises in the cost of wages, fuel, equipment, insurance, and a whole host of other things upon which the industry relies. Now, that in itself would have been sufficient to leave some companies struggling to make ends meet. But there's more, much more, that is eroding the very ground upon which the demolition industry stands. Late and non-payments and retentions imposed by developers and main contractors are kryptonite to demolition's cash flow. So-called value engineering, demanding further cuts on agreed prices from its supply chain, like Vistry did recently, removes further fat from demolition's already lean margins. And there's another factor here, and it's a fact that is either a contributing cause or a result of these shifts in the field of demolition. There was a time not so long ago when local demolition companies stayed local. There was a time when big jobs went to big firms, and those big firms expected big paydays because of their skill, their expertise, and their experience, all of which they could bring to bear. More recently, however, those traditional lines have been blurred and become less defined. I regularly hear complaints that some of the UK's biggest demolition companies are undercutting their smaller rivals on price. Those same big companies often compete well outside their usual geographic comfort zone and take on work that they might have considered beneath them just a few short years ago. And when work gets harder to come by, all of this increases exponentially. The UK demolition sector now has a number of super companies, and those super companies are hungry beasts that require constant feeding with demolition projects and with demolition turnover. And that has seemingly given rise to 2 courses of action. The first is that those big companies use their heft and their reputation to hoover up lots of lower cost work, which, when mixed with some of the larger, more lucrative work, ensures that their men and their machines are kept employed and that their coffers are kept suitably filled. The second, which is more prevalent perhaps in the nation's capital, is that those same big companies use their heft and reputation to hoover up lots of lower cost work and then simply outsource it to one of a number of companies that now survive purely as subcontractors to one or more larger demolition companies. Either way, these practices leave less and less for the smaller companies, while simultaneously driving down both the actual and the perceived price of demolition. Now, a developer or main contractor can conceivably employ a big name, big reputation demolition company for the same or even less than they would pay a smaller regional player. Those prices are unsustainable for a company with limited overheads, but they are nothing short of suicidal to those big companies that enjoy the fancy office, fancy equipment, fancy lifestyle trappings. Now, earlier today on my usual daily broadcast, the Breakfast Show, I mentioned the fact that I would be hosting this session, and a point was raised by one of our regular audience members, who I know is actually in the chat at the moment. And I do think it's worth revisiting. He said that it was interesting that several of the companies that have gone under recently were not just demolition. That may have been where they originated, but demolition had become just a part of what they did until their untimely demise. Now, there are some companies that have pulled off the diversification trick really rather well. Look at Keltbray. Keltbray has done it so well that they're not really a demolition company anymore. But the question arises, is that widespread diversification wise? Is it sensible? Or is there a possibility that some companies have overreached themselves, spread themselves too thin? I know the old adage advises against placing all your eggs in a single basket, but how many baskets is too many? And what if your demolition basket is really good, while your other baskets are not so good? Does that mean that you spend all your time checking on those other baskets while neglecting the very basket where it all began? Now, I will be going over to the comments in just a second, but I just got a few final points that I'd like to make. 3 of the 4 companies that have collapsed in the past 3 months were members of the National Federation of Demolition Contractors at the time of their demise. Is the Federation going to respond in any way? And if so, when? They didn't respond when the government set about removing the red diesel subsidy. They certainly didn't respond when 10 of their number were caught with their hands in the till by the CMA. And so far, they haven't responded on the growing negative impact of the embodied carbon lobby. We are long past the point when the Federation started losing members faster than it could recruit them. Surely they should be doing something, anything, to help avert a growing crisis in the sector they claim to represent. And the final point, for now at least, is this. 4 companies out of about 500 UK demolition companies going to the wall is not necessarily a cause for panic, even if they have come in such quick succession. But it seems almost certain that these 4 will not be the last. I know personally of at least 2 more that are teetering on the brink of existence as we speak. The industry is right to be concerned right now, but if those 2 and possibly more companies go as well, surely that constitutes an industry crisis. And if it doesn't, I honestly don't know what will. That's my monologue done and dusted. Let me head on over to the chat because I'd like to get your take on all of this, or some of this anyway. Good afternoon to Andy Darvell. Good afternoon to Dan Cullen, to Mark Whiting. Excuse me, got a hair in my mouth. To Gary Muirhead, to Mick Saunders. Mick Saunders was actually the person that made the comment about this idea of being a group. We'll come back to that in just a second. There's Chris Ford as well. It's tragic how this is being allowed to happen, says Dan Cullen. There's a question. Is it being allowed to happen? I don't know the answer to that. I've just explained the subject matter of this show to my wife just before I came on air, and trying to give her an idea of what the show was intended to do. When you think about, if Squibb had gone on their own, you could point at it and say, you could accuse them, as some of their former employees and some of their creditors did, of financial mismanagement and footballer lifestyle and all of those kind of things. When 1 becomes 2, you kind of start to ask the question. When 2 becomes 3, it starts to suggest there's bigger things afoot. And when 3 becomes 4, I asked a question on our Breakfast Show, and it was a joke question, I admit. It's something I picked up off Twitter some months ago. And the question was, seems bizarre to raise it now, but the question was, how many owls would you need to see in the wild before you thought, hang on, there's something going awry here? Now, I think the consensus was somewhere around about 4 or 5. I know we've got a few people that work and live out in the country, and seeing owls is not unusual. But to us city folk, if I saw an owl, it would be quite a big deal. If I saw 2 owls, that would be exceptional. If I saw 3 and then possibly 4, all of a sudden, there is something wider and deeper going on. Going away from owls and back to demolition companies. When 1 company goes pop, nothing unusual. When 2 go pop, yeah, okay, in quick succession, unusual, but nothing to panic about. but 3 and then 4 in 3 months. As I say, I've been back. Demolition News has now been going for 15, 16 years. I've been back to the very beginning, and we have not had such a spate of demolition company collapses in the entire time that I've been doing that. And I would suggest there has not been such an unprecedented collapse within the demolition industry ever. That's what we're looking at. And bearing in mind, as I say, I've been back through 2008, 2009, longest, deepest recession in living memory. And we lost one, and maybe 6 months later, we lost another one. And then maybe we lost another one the year after that, but not 4 in such quick succession. Graham Williams is here as well. Chris Forward says, heard a large construction firm went bump last night, PM for details. I will do that. I'd love to hear about that. What is the NFDC doing? Bear with me 1 second. I do need a slurp. I mentioned the NFDC in my rather too long monologue. And it's a good question. What is the NFDC doing? As far as I can tell, as we speak, nothing at all, which is unfortunately pretty much par for the course with the NFDC these days. As I say, red diesel, CMA investigation, embodied carbon. They've said nothing about any of those things. They've done nothing about this one so far. But this one, perhaps more than the others, maybe the CMA is an exception, but this one feels like this is the one that they should be responding to, because with each member they lose, any last vestige of credibility that they have is going out the door. And I mentioned this on the show this morning. The NFDC currently has, I don't know, off the top of my head, about 130 members. It used to be 200, 220, 230 back in the day. At what point does everyone look at it and go, what's the point? Is it when it drops below 100? Is it when it drops below 120? Is it when it gets to 50? I honestly don't know the answer to that. But picking up on this, and I think it's, you kind of have to look at these things in a balanced way. What could the NFDC actually do? Now, to my mind, one thing they could do, and I'm not necessarily saying it necessarily requires a face-to-face meeting, although, 4 in quick succession, 3 of which were members, maybe a face-to-face meeting is not such a bad idea, although they do have their AGM coming up in about a month's time, I think. So maybe they're saving it for then. But should they go out to their membership and advise and encourage, for companies to stick together to, report their financial trials and tribulations a bit earlier, bearing in mind they've got a couple of million quid in the funds between the NFDC and the NDTG. Could they do a bridging loan for the companies that are on the brink? Now, some of these companies are never coming back. A couple of million into the 23 million pound hole left behind by Squibb would have just been money pissed up the wall. I fully accept that. But is there something, should they invest some of their millions in an independent financial advisor to help advise and guide their member companies? Maybe that's an idea. If anybody's got any ideas on that, I'd love to hear from you. Funny enough, you mentioned 3 of the things I jotted down on the main show. Good. Great minds think alike. Mark, says Mick Saunders, I was working through most of COVID, and so was a good few demo companies. Some I even know were claiming furlough for the blokes working on site. So COVID was not a prime factor. I'm going to change glasses very quickly because I can't see. No, I mean, I mentioned in my monologue, I don't believe that COVID, for a start, as Mick rightly said, demolition and construction were granted key worker status. Yes, there was a couple of weeks, I think, where nobody really knew what we were all doing. There was are we at work? Are we not at work? Can we work safely? And there was the whole trying to manage social distancing and getting men to and from work. We've encouraged you for the last 20 years to all ride share, all drive in the same van. And now all of a sudden you've got to come in on your own. There was that transition period while everybody got used to the whole COVID concept and the subsequent lockdown and the working practices that went with it. But I don't believe that COVID was necessarily a contributing factor. And one of the reasons I don't believe that is because, we are talking about 4 companies, 4 in quick succession. But if COVID had hit the industry that hard, surely we would be talking about 40 rather than 4. Every company that lists itself as a demolition company would have suffered from COVID. They would have also suffered to varying degrees from fluctuations in scrap prices. I don't believe that those 2 are to blame. Oh, excuse me. Mick Saunders also says, sorry, got to say the NFTC will not do sod all for the industry. Yeah. Wish that were not the case, but I think you're probably right. Chris Ford says, work smarter, work leaner, reduce costs. How far can you go when things become tight? It's all right when there's work every day, but when it becomes spasmodic, the cost of working smart catches up with you. I was speaking to a demolition company. I would guess off the top of my head, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And the owner of the company, or the principal of the company, basically said that in order to keep his ship afloat, he needed 300 grand through the door every week, 52 weeks per year. Because there was a rolling program of work, and there was a rolling program of payment, wages to meet, fuel bills to pay, equipment to keep serviced, and so he needed 300 grand per week through the door. Now, bearing in mind what goes on within developers, major contractors, with late and slow payments, if that 300 grand doesn't turn up one week, the week after that, you need £600,000. And if it doesn't turn up that week, you are now down almost £1 million. And you cannot, no company can sustain being down £1 million on a rolling basis. So, yeah. Going back, work leaner, reduce costs. The obvious thing, and I know this is a subject, I'm going to go slightly off tangent here. One of the things that we have done in the industry is put more and more people into agency work. A big way to save money, if you're up against it, is to cut your human resources. In other words, make people redundant or lay people off. That has never been easier than it is today. If you've got agency workers working for your team, you could send them home. What is the time now? It's 1:23 in the afternoon. You could tell them at 1:23 in the afternoon their services are no longer required and there is no comeback on you. That's it. That was when they stopped, and you only owe that money. Are companies doing that? What I am seeing, and I'm kind of answering my own question in my head here. One of the real indicators that a company is about to literally fall off the edge is you suddenly get a spurt of, I certainly get a spurt, I'm sure Dan Cullen gets it as well. You get a spurt of people applying for work, all from the same company, because either they've been laid off or they've seen the writing on the wall. But that goes right down to the wire. It literally goes right down to the wire at the point where the company is, shuffling away assets into dark corners where nobody can find them, and they're doing their level best to possibly take a step back from the brink. That's when that happens. Could that not have happened previously? And let me make this 100% clear, particularly given the audience that I'm speaking to here. I do not, under any circumstances, want working men and working women made redundant, laid off, temporarily suspended, or whatever it might be. But personally, I would rather take a bit of short-term pain for a bit of long-term gain. If my employer, and I'm fortunate not to have one, if my employer said, look, times is tough, go and put your feet up for 4 weeks, twiddle your thumbs, go and stack shelves at Sainsbury's. Once we're over this hump, you'll be back, and we'll all be sweetness and light. Much the same as is done in the manufacturing industry. JCB do that very, very well. They have like a float of staff that come and go as fluctuations in demand rise and fall. I'd be happy with that than actually the company's collapsed. Sod off. Let's have a look. Mixed owners. You mentioned flash cars, etc., etc. I've seen company owners turn up on site to price up. I've even heard them and seen clients raise their eyebrows and even say if they can afford to turn up in Bentleys and Ferraris, they are earning too much out of us. You'd have to think that is incredibly short-sighted, and I do know it happens because I've seen it. You know, bearing in mind, you know, regardless of all that I said about the heft of some of these companies, the reputation, the experience, and the expertise they can bring to bear, the absolute truth is 99% of UK demolition contracts, and I'm sure this is the same the world over, is decided on price. And how can you justifiably turn up on site and say that you are offering the best possible price when you've pitched up, sporting your Rolex, and you've just climbed out of a Ferrari? It's laughable, but it happens. It's a good point. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If ever you find yourself, and I hope you don't, but if ever you find yourself at a demolition industry funeral, it is almost laughable in its extravagance. You know, everybody is dripping in gold. Everybody's wearing a Rolex. Everyone's arrived in a Bentley or a Rolls Royce or a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. And all it is just public displays of wealth to try and outdo their local rival. But all of that costs money. All of that costs money, you know, and it, again, you know, there's no evidence with any of the four companies, but if you are supporting that kind of lifestyle, are you pumping enough back into your company? Or are you living, what's the expression, high on the hog while, you know, you're hemorrhaging below the waterline? What's the new president doing? Thought he was going to sort it out. Wish on you. Wish on you. I've got a lot of respect for John Lynch. I know he hosted a bunch of seminars talking about safety last year, but I'm not seeing anything at all. And you know, and ultimately, he's the figurehead, so yes, he should be doing something. But they've got a new CEO in there. Should they be doing something? Should they be putting their head above the parapet and advising and guiding? And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there has been such prolonged and protracted silence from the NFDC now that I've kind of lost sight of what it is that they actually do. I took a look at their news section on their website maybe last week, and I think they had 3 items on the front page, one of which was announcing the fact that they are doing their demolition awards. I think that's next month. One of which was a goodbye message from Howard Button, the former CEO, and I can't remember what the other one was, but all of it was inward facing. You know, our CEO is leaving, our awards are about to happen, and our something or other. There's nothing going the other way. There's nothing going, you know, for the self-appointed elite of the industry to stand up and say, here is what we are doing. Here is what we are advising both our members and our non-members in this time of growing crisis. There is no leadership being shown by the NFDC or by the Institute of Demolition Engineers either. Behind all these companies going bust, there is a family with a son, brother, mother, fathers, all going to be affected by this financially. Yes. Now, I'll come back to the employees in just a second, but this is another point, and I do wonder about this. We are, as a demolition industry, we are at the point of probably 3rd and sometimes 4th generation demolition companies. Some of the biggest demolition companies in this country, and I realize they've acquired other firms along the way, but by and large they were spawned from a family company. So father started it, son came in and took it over, then grandson. I have a theory on this, and I don't know if this is borne out by fact. This is just a feeling. If you are a first generation demolition man, maybe you were involved in the haulage sector immediately, well, maybe even during the war or immediately afterwards, and you were involved in the haulage business and muck away and you know, bomb site clearance and that kind of thing, and you saw what was going on in demolition, you thought, do you know, I fancy a bit of that. And you work hard, you slog your guts out, you absolutely slog your guts out, and you build yourself a little company, and the little company gets a bit bigger, and then it gets a bit bigger still. And then 20, 30 years later, your son comes on board. Now, your son potentially is better educated than you because, you know, you've earned a few quid. So rather than going to the local comprehensive school, maybe you went to grammar school, maybe you went to university. He's a bit more switched on. And maybe that son comes in not just with demolition in his blood, but he also comes in with a wider knowledge, you know, more life experience than perhaps his father had, you know, no baggage from the war. So that second generation can take a company that big and make it that big. Then you get to the third generation. The third generation hasn't really had to work for a living. By the time it gets to them, they have a very nice lifestyle. You know, they've been privately educated. They don't want for anything. You know, whereas their father would have gone to work with their grandfather on a Saturday morning from the age of 8, they've never done that. You know, they were busy riding horses or sailing their yachts or whatever it might be. So when it comes to that third generation, do you have the same drive, the same passion, the same dedication? My feeling is you probably don't. Is that one of the issues that we have? Love to hear from you. Mick Saunders says, if I seem to be saying too much, I apologise now, but I watch an industry I gave my heart to pull and tear themselves to pieces. I've got to be honest, this is why I am doing this show. As a result of COVID, you know, I've spent years writing about demolition, and I've spent the last 15, 16 years running demolitionnews.com. My focus has been 99.9% demolition with a little bit of plant thrown in for good measure. COVID came along, had to shift, had to pivot, so I ended up doing the Breakfast Show, which is a combination of my love of demolition, but also my love of plant and equipment. So, frankly, you know, if another 10, 20, 30 demolition companies were to go to the wall, it would hurt my heart, but really and truly, it wouldn't hurt my pocket. But the reason I'm doing this show is because of my heart. You know, same as you, Mick. I've drawn a good living, and I've got some absolutely fantastic friends in the industry. I don't want to see them struggling. I don't want to see them failing. I don't want to see them having to rebuild from the ground up, or possibly never being able to do so. I don't want any of that. You know, and I'm not going to go on about who it is that says this, but you know, there is an organisation that claims to report the news in the industry, but only in a positive way. How do you put a positive spin on the collapse of 4 companies that have been created out of the blood, sweat, and tears of the owners, and 4 companies that have now left, as Gary said, 4 lots of sons, mothers, brothers, fathers, uncles, nieces, nephews, all of those have been left financially wanting because of a turn in the demolition industry. And I do feel like the industry is, I think Mick's hit the nail on the head, is tearing itself to pieces. I don't think the circumstances within which the industry works now are necessarily helpful. I mean, I think they're very unhelpful in absolute truth. I want to just, I am going to go back to the chat in a second, but something's just occurred to me, and this is, I think this is further indication of just how far the industry has fallen. I'm not going to dwell on the CMA thing. I'm really not. It was what it was, 60 million in fines, all NFTC members, 10 of them, and so on down the line. But as you're aware, the CMA ultimately released the transcriptions of all their findings. And there was mention in there of a demolition company. I'm not going to name them because, you know, they've had their slap on the wrist. It's not for me to drag them over the coals again. But the company in question was, if I were to ask most people, name the top 5 demolition companies, the company I'm thinking of would have been probably second or third out their mouth. If you know demolition, you know this company. And one of the instances where there was collusion and basically they had a deal where everybody else that was bidding for a job took a step back so that they could win it. And it is in writing. All the other companies took a step back. Yes, they were being paid to do so, but they took a step back because the company in question desperately needed that work. Now, this is one of the biggest companies, biggest demolition companies in the country, one of the industry's elite, one of the members of the NFDC, of which they are probably the most proud, and yet they are potentially one project away from collapsing under their own weight. About 10, 12 years ago, there was a report came out. I think it was called the Plimsoll Report. And it was suggested at the time that something like a third of UK demolition companies were just one project away from financial collapse. Now, at the time, myself included, a lot of people poo-pooed that. Oh, that will never come to pass. I think the Plimsoll Report was wrong in only one area, and it was an area of time. It was maybe a decade too early, because virtually everything else that was written in that report has come to pass. We've got companies now that are literally operating on single-digit margins, profit margins, and all it takes, as we've seen, all it takes is for a wayward shift in the cost of, or the sale price of scrap, or for one of their supply chain, not their supply chain, but one of their the companies above them, be it a client, developer, main contractor, to not pay them, to pay them slowly, or to go bust themselves. That one job could be enough to take them under. That, to my mind, is utterly unsustainable. And I'm not saying for one moment that demolition, particularly given the fact that we'll have construction people watching, I'm not saying for one moment that demolition contractors should get their heads together, drive up prices so they're all making lots of money and they're therefore protected from shifts in the market, because frankly, that wouldn't be that far from what the CMA uncovered. But single-digit profit margins on companies of that size is unsustainable. We all know anybody that's been in this industry for more than 10 years, because it does seem to work in decade-long fluctuations. If you've been in this industry for more than 10 years, you will know that there'll be boom and there'll be bust, and there'll be boom and there'll be bust, and so it goes on. The cyclical nature of this industry, in demolition and construction, is clearly documented. We all know that there will be a high followed by a low, followed by a high, followed by a low. And if you're not making more than 1 or 2% when you're on a high, when that low comes around, you're fucked. Simply fucked. 100%. Dan, I've seen it on 2 on jobs. Men claiming. I'm going back to, I think that was about furlough and that kind of thing. Have the banks got a lot to do with this situation by the withdrawal of funds? I'm not aware of that happening on any of the 4 occasions, actually. I think you get to the point where CCJs mount to the point where you can't fight them any longer, or you can't stave them off. You get winding up orders and that kind of thing. And ultimately, the ultimate arbiter of a lot of these things, when you look at Blucon, who have just gone, they didn't go today, but we brought you the news today. Their biggest creditor is HMRC, and HMRC will want their pound of flesh, and they will get it one way or another. They're not actually top of the list of people that get their money out of a failed company, but they're pretty close to the top, and they will get their money. And if that means they've got to pull the rug from under somebody, they're more than happy to do so. Sorry, I've got to go and lose some more money. Catch you tomorrow. If I'm lucky, I can watch it later. Ta-ta for now. Yeah, have a good day, Chris. No worries at all. Dan Cullen says, do you know what's an even bigger laugh? That these companies' CEO will end up running another company in a few months again. How can they get away with doing it? it's a bugbear of mine. I'm bearing in mind, I mean, we did discuss this slightly on the show this morning. You've got a situation where I'm doing this completely off the top of my head. I don't know the situation with Blucon, and I don't know the situation with McCormack, but both Squibb and Wooldridge, the directors of those companies either had partial or entire ownership of other companies that were either lying dormant for just such an eventuality or were active, but they weren't particularly active in them. So, there is every possibility that Wooldridge will, or the directors of Wooldridge could be back literally the same day they went pop. But even before, they could have started to angle the work to that other company even before they went to the wall. How are they getting away with it? Because the law allows it. The law allows it. And, limited liability, I understand how all that works and what have you. But you would have thought, and particularly when you've got repeat offenders, if you've got to the point where somebody is taking companies under right, left and centre and taking people to the tune of millions of pounds, sooner or later, surely somebody's got to say enough. And it is possible. I mean, we saw as a result of the CMA investigations, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 director bans of up to 5 and 6 and maybe even 7 years. So, the power is there to do that, should they so desire. It's just a matter of whether they do desire. Andy Deville says, I've only ever been laid off once when Davis and Sampson went under. They kept me on in the yard as long as they could, but put all their eggs in one basket and gambled on one big job that got delayed. And that was that. It was in 2010. And luckily, there was enough agency work to keep me going until I got a job with Gaywoods. I hope the guys who have lost their jobs in the last 3 months find something, anything to keep enough money coming in. And keep the money coming in. There's 2 things there. Obviously, for the working man or the working woman within a demolition company, you've got to put food on the table. You've got to pay your rent or pay your mortgage or whatever it might be. You've got to pay your car payments and all of those kind of things. But I do get the impression, and I get the impression probably even more at the top end of the industry, that keeping the money coming in has become almost all-consuming. They've grown to such a size and such a weight that they, rather than concentrating on running their business and innovating and diversifying and really sort of targeting their future, they're like a greedy bloke at the buffet. I don't care what it tastes like, just keep shoveling it in. And you can't do that. I mean, I've written about this, and I think the article probably comes out in the next 24 hours or something like that. And what was I going to say? Yeah, there's an expression, a friend of mine used to say this. I used to phone up, how's it going? Oh, I'm keeping the bailiff from the door. And it was a throwaway remark, But to be absolutely honest, it does feel like there is a lot of demolition companies who exist primarily at the moment to keep the bailiff from the door. Never mind what the work is, never mind where the work is, never mind whether we are suitable for it or it is suitable for us, we will take it on and we will do it. And we will do it even if it means we're working miles from home, even if it means that we've got to ship our equipment and our men ridiculous numbers of miles while claiming to be environmentally friendly, even if it means that we're working at margins that are utterly unsustainable. It's that greedy shovel, keep the work coming in. Dan Cullen says, and what will happen when these companies directors, when your company goes under, you should he still be involved? I think that's a case-by-case basis. I mean, I know of one company, and this isn't in the recent spate, but I know of one company who basically went out of business entirely, and I do mean entirely, down to the actions of one of their subcontractors. Major balls up, and basically the subcontractor had enough money to starve them out. As a result, they went pop. So should that director be allowed to manage another company? 100% yes. The collapse and the demise of his company was totally beyond his control. He should not be further penalised for that, in my opinion. But if you are found wanting as a director And when I say found wanting, if there is financial mismanagement, financial irregularities, or if it can be clearly proven that you were siphoning off money that probably belonged in the company to keep the company coffers filled and cover all eventualities there, but instead of that you were spending it on your next Rolex or your next Bentley, then maybe somebody needs to take a closer look at that. Mick Saunders says, I still remember when I started with Dickie Ashton, he told me once, if I can earn double the amount of the cost of wages and fuel, then what I do is profit into the company. And he did. These days, it's a cutthroat game. So many ridiculous prices are put in just to get the work. Yeah, it is. You know, and again, I do wonder if this growth at all costs is partly to blame. There was a few years ago, kind of an evolution of the high reach excavator. When I first started writing about high reach excavators, they were like 15 meters tall. Well, 15 went to 20, 20 went to 25, 25 went to 30, and then to 40, and then to 50. And then there was a couple. I think somebody went to 63 meters, and then somebody else went to 65, and then somebody went to 67. And when you asked the modifier, you know, the company up in Ipswich, when you asked the modifier, 63 and 67 seem like odd numbers. 40 and 50, nice round numbers, you can understand that. But 63 and 67 seem quite an arbitrary number. And I was told they just wanted to be the biggest. Now apply that to your demolition company. You know, they were going along, maybe doing 20, 30, 40, 50 million a year, but they were still third or fourth. They weren't the biggest. So they started to, you know, they'll open an office in another location. You know, a London company might open an office in Scotland. A Scottish company might open one in Manchester, and so on down the line. They then start bidding for work that maybe previously might have been a bit beneath them. You know, they specialize in tower blocks. They're now doing toilet blocks. All of those things contribute to that whole. You know, it is a cutthroat game. And I realize this is a criticism of the so-called cowboy element of the industry. But if you are a 1, 2, 5-man band, you've got a couple of diggers, you know what you're doing. You know, maybe you've got all your training credentials are up to scratch, but you operate out of your own back bedroom. You've got a yard that you rent a bit of somebody else's yard, so you are running really, really lean. You know, your guys aren't paid top dollar. They're paid a decent wage, but they're not paid top dollar, and you keep it really, really tight. And then you lose a job to a national company. Now, you as a local company with your lean margins were hoping to make 4, 5, maybe 6% on that with your low margins, with your low overheads, rather. What is a major national making on a job when they've got to move men, machines, highly paid, expensive, from one end of the country to another? Mick Saunders says, lost the sound at his end. I hope that is just you, because I think it's okay. And he's just said, sorry, lost all sound on the other laptop, so now on this one. Welcome back. They can release statements. Why can't the NFTC make a statement over the current crisis? I don't know. I'm not going to go. Listen, if I were still doing their PR, which I used to do, I would be imploring them right now to do something, to say something, not just about this, although that would be my starting point, but about embodied carbon and you know, do something, stand up and be counted. You know, this you are supposed to be, you claim to be the voice of the industry. The industry is in a really, really bad state at the moment, and your voice is silent. Where are you? Dan Cullen, as the saying goes, I hadn't heard this saying, but it does back up what I said. As the saying goes, it takes 1-2 generations to build a company, and the third generation to take it down. Maybe there was some truth in what I had to say after all. Jim Turner says, sorry, I only just had time to tune in. But the question I have is this. Have all these firms actually gone pop in the true sense? Or have they organised wrap-ups because the job isn't worth finishing as it's going to make a big loss? Let's put it like this. All four that we're talking about are insolvent. They are all going through the administration process. Some creditors may get a few pence in the pound back. Some won't get anything at all. But those companies will cease to exist. Squibb ceased to exist. Blucon, gone. Wooldridge, gone. McCormack, gone. Now, they may well come back under other guises. The directors may well come under other guises. But those four companies have gone. Mick says, HMRC have tried to end the game of going bust and starting up again a couple of weeks later. But as Mark says, the law allows this to happen. The one thing I would say about this is that the HMRC have actually demonstrated both their ability and their willingness to even bring companies back out of insolvency so that they can get their money back. And I know that's been the case on a few occasions in construction, not in demolition. But if the HMRC have got their teeth into you, they will get their money back one way or another. But the problem is, and again, I've been quite surprised. I did a bit of research on this, and the situation wasn't as I had been led to believe. I'd been led to believe that when a company goes pop, they employ the services of an insolvency practitioner. The insolvency practitioner doesn't do it for love; they do it for money. And I'd been led to believe that they took a huge slug of money, and what was left, HMRC got first dibs on, and if there was anything left, it would be distributed among whoever was left as creditors. I am now led to believe that while HMRC are one of the first to get their money, they are not the first, they are actually the second. And there is apparently a legal cap on the amount that an insolvency company can charge. There are exceptions, however, and I know one of the companies that we've been talking about, and it will come out in the fullness of time, but one of the companies that I've been talking about had employed the services apparently of a restructuring company. And a restructuring company is basically a company that comes in and advises, but also loans money. But they want that money back with considerable interest. They are one of the first that gets first dibs. So there you are. I'm going to say good afternoon to whoever that is. I can't pronounce your name. I don't know where you're watching from, but good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. And like Queen in Ireland, before he went pop and passed his possessions to family members, the HMRC in Ireland caught wind and cleared everything and some of his family houses too. They have that within their abilities. Yeah, absolutely right. Mick Wright says, I also think a lot of this is down to what happens under the table. Even to this day, the envelope plays a big part in this game. If you don't play the game, then the work goes elsewhere. We're not even at the first anniversary of the CMA, and we've already heard whispers of potential further investigations. £60 million in fines made my eyes water. Has it actually changed the demolition landscape? I don't believe it has. And I know the NFDC instigated some form that they expect their members to fill in to say we won't be all corrupt and stuff. What's that worth? But they could have done so much better with that by suspending temporarily or otherwise the companies that have been found guilty. Jim says, but did the firms lose everything? Plenty of companies lease their machines, yard, vehicles and equipment from a parent parallel company that runs without risk as it doesn't contract or own anything. So when the contracting company gets stung, there's nothing for the receiver to take. Again, case by case, but when you look at Squibbs, they tried to lease back their premises. That didn't work. A lot of their equipment was reclaimed by the lease companies. But ultimately, they didn't have enough assets, and I understand that is precisely the case with Blucon. They did not have enough assets within the company to satisfy the creditors that they had, at which point you are insolvent. Now, what happens to the assets that you do have, bearing in mind the speed with which an insolvency happens? It doesn't happen in a day, it doesn't happen in a week, it happens over a period of months and possibly years. There is plenty of time in that time for you to squirrel away your assets, hand them off to other people, start new companies, or breathe new life into a dormant company and start to divert things that way. All of that is perfectly possible. Mick Saunders, or Mick Wright, says, another memory is from Peter Clifford. He said, I'm as big as I want to be. I get work, but if that means I've got to pay to get the job, then I will not. If nothing else, I don't want to be big. I will lose track and lose the company. There's an interesting point on this. I have had an opportunity to speak to and interview several people that have lost their companies over the last 30 odd years, and who have come back. One way or another, they've come back. But they come back changed. It's that pet cemetery thing, isn't it? Sometimes they come back, but when they come back, they're not the same. The appetite for being the biggest and the fanciest and stuff is gone. I tend to find that when companies come back from having gone down the toilet, they come back humbled and significantly more focused. Now, whether that's, I don't know, some deep held guilt within their psyche that means they don't want to come back and try and take on the world again, or whether they are sufficiently chastened by perhaps their over enthusiasm and overreaching in the previous company, I don't know. But they do come back changed. And, lots and lots of examples of companies that have come back, but have come back, I want enough. I don't want it all, I want enough. And I hear a few firms in the construction industry are on the brink. A few envelopes changed hands. Listen, the one thing I would say about the whole CMA investigation, was I surprised that the investigation happened? No. Was I surprised at the names of the companies that were involved? A couple, but generally not. Was I surprised at how widespread it was? Nope. And when I'm bearing in mind that investigation took the best part of 4 years, and we've had almost a year since. And I don't think I've met a single person in demolition that has mentioned the CMA and go, oh, what a shock. Because everybody's aware. Everybody's aware of what has gone on and, frankly, what continues to go on. It surprises nobody. I think the only thing that surprised me about it was the fact that we have apparently ignored the opportunity to make that £60 million in fines a line in the sand, a turning point, the point at which we say, that's how we used to do it, and we've been caught with our fingers in the till. This is how we're going to do it going forward. And again, they're not here to defend themselves, but I would level part of that blame at the NFDC. Had they stood up for themselves and said, all 10 of the companies who were all members of their federation, they've all been temporarily suspended while we carry out our own investigation. If we are satisfied at the end of it, they will be welcomed back in. And if they're not, or if we're not, then they're not. But they didn't. Instead of which they said nothing, not a word. Well, I know why Squibb didn't get taken as their yard is such a mess. It costs millions to clear. It's diabolical. Yeah, I've heard that on the grapevine. Jim Turner says, why would a large contracting company leave themselves wide open to losing everything by being the owner of assets when they could have leased it from themselves through a parent parallel company? It's just arse covering. Simple, really. It is. It is. But again, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization here because I've said it before, and I will probably say it until I hang my hat up. Demolition is an industry that has some of the very, very smartest people I've ever met. And I do mean street smarts, common sense, but also, formal, recognized intelligence as well. There's some really smart cookies there. But by and large, they have got where they are by being demolition men. Is the average demolition man as financially astute as a banker or a lawyer? My guess is they're probably not. And I also wonder about this overreaching thing, where they've diversified or they've grown too big too soon and taken on more work and debt than they can honestly afford. I think there must be a temptation, and I'm sure I've done it myself, where somebody asks you to do a thing and you agree, and then somebody else asks you to do something at the same time, but you've already agreed, so you end up doing two things at the same time, and neither gets the full value, and you are left juggling. Is that the demolition industry? It feels like it sometimes. Unbelievable how they got away for so long doing what they've done, charging from contaminated materials just to mix it with their muck in there. I've heard the same. I don't know whether that is true. It may well be, but I think the last days of Squibb and the last days of any demolition company, I don't think are necessarily indicative of what had gone before. My understanding with Squibb, and I could be wrong, is that there was, because they were outstanding payments to waste companies and that kind of thing, they couldn't actually dispose of the waste. They had no option but to haul it back to their own yard. And I'd like to think that, given all their experience, their 75 years experience, I'd like to think that they were originally doing it, not necessarily dumping it in the right place because they were dumping it in their own yard, but maybe the intention was to segregate and once we've got over this hump, we'll do this all properly. But then when it all came on top, all of that goes out of the window, doesn't it? Mick says, what then is the answer for the industry? Fuel, carbon, and God alone knows what will raise its ugly head. If a couple more big boys go to the ball, the NFTC will the NFT get up off its arse? Will the government step in and what are major contractors going to do when they can't build because the old building is still standing? Take those points one at a time. Fuel and carbon are actually, in my opinion, going to make the situation worse. Even if, like we saw earlier this week with the Ringway Centre up in Birmingham, it was originally to be demolished, and then there was a local legal battle that trying to get it saved because it was architecturally significant and so on down the line, and embodied carbon and everything else. But ultimately, the planning authorities saw sense and said, we originally said it was going to be demolished. We are still saying it's going to be demolished. But the period between it's going to be demolished and we're definitely going to demolish it was what, 6 months? That's 6 months in which a demolition contractor didn't get to start on that. Now, I don't know whether that job had actually been let, but that is a 6-month gap that could have been filled in somebody's timeline. Now, it might only be going out to tender now, but bearing in mind, maybe Squibb would have been in the running for that. Maybe it wouldn't, but and Blucon are on the doorstep. Maybe if Blucon had been given the nod on the Ringway, maybe they'd still be with us, but they weren't, and that's my concern. I think there will be a bit less demolition because of embodied carbon, but I think there will be slower demolition because of embodied carbon. I think it will create a logjam in the industry. That's my big concern with that. If a couple more big boys go to the wall, will the NFTC get up off its ass? No, it won't. I think you know the answer to this, Mick, as much the same as I do. I don't think the NFTC of today is what it was originally set out to be. As far as I can tell, and listen, I don't spend any time there. I don't have anything to do with any of them there, and so on down the line. So maybe they are beavering away on the demolition revolution while we're speaking. They may well be. I don't know. But the absolute truth is, whereas they used to be an active lobbying organisation with friends in government, friends in high places, literally, where they had Lord Snowden as their patron, when they were issuing guidance notes, when they were lobbying not just government but the HSE and the Environment Agency. I think all of that's gone. All the NFDC does now is host events. It hosts its AGM and its convention. It hosts its awards, and it hosts regional meetings. Quite why anybody retains their membership of the NFDC these days is beyond me. And I know it comes with a lot of tradition, and I know a lot of companies have worked long and hard to get that membership. But in terms of value that they get back, unless they are willing to pay 5-10 grand a year just to be invited to a knees up in a London hotel, I honestly don't get it anymore. Mick says you're 100% right. Even yourself had high hopes of the president, but alas, he has been very quiet. He has. And listen, it is not my job to sit here and defend him. John has had his health issues. I'm sure that's not helped. But as I've said, he is but the figurehead of a much, much bigger organisation. They've got directors and they've got a board, they've got an executive committee, they've got a chief executive, all of whom should, even if John's laid up in hospital, all of whom should be driving this thing forward. But in actual fact, what they're doing is just milking the cash cow that is the National Demolition Training Group and planning their next event. That's it. And I do want to go back to this. What are the major constructors going to do when they can't build because the old building is still standing? I think some of those old buildings will remain standing. I think a lot of the main contractors, the big developers, have already pivoted. They've already decided, actually, it's going to get harder and harder for us to get permission to remove something before we build something new. So we best get better at refurb and refit. My mate Matt Malloy has started a refurb and refit magazine for precisely that reason. He's not done it on a punt. He's not done it for the good of his health, and he's not done it because it seemed like a good idea at the time. It seemed like a good idea because it is a good idea. That's the way the industry is going to go. There is going to be more refurb and refit than there has ever been before. And where is that work coming from? It's coming out of the pocket of the demolition industry. Yes, the Old Boys Club. I wish it wasn't. I wish it wasn't. Nothing would give me greater pleasure than for the NFDC or the IDE or somebody to stand up and beat the drum and bang their fist on the desk and shout and swear and go back to the major contractors and tell them enough is enough. I said it earlier, and I don't like to keep swearing in these things, but Mick, you've been around this industry for long enough. There is no industry in the world that swears quite as much as the demolition industry, which is one of the reasons I love it as much as I do. If you went onto a site as a layman and said, I think you're doing it wrong, they would answer you with, fuck off. If you went on there and said, I'm your next door neighbour and I think you're creating more dust than is necessary, they would say, fuck off. If you said, I live up the street and I've parked my car and I've got some dust on it, I think you should pay me £500 to get it fixed, they would say, fuck off. But a major contractor comes along and says, we know we agreed on the price, we know we agreed on the timescales, but we want you to do it for less money and in less time. And while you're about it, we also want you to factor in this, this, and this. And please make sure you get out of the way of the piling contractor. We realise that we told you that they were coming in 2 weeks after you, but they're actually coming in 2 weeks before you're scheduled to end. Is that okay? And the demolition industry just goes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. 3 bags full, sir. Why have we lost the ability to tell people to poke it? I understand that, having been watching what's going on at Canary Wharf, even looking at a change of use to residential for the tower blocks. I wouldn't be at all surprised. Listen, when you think about the makeup of the property portfolio of the UK, if I go to my local high street, that's wrong, not my local high street, but my local-ish high street. My nearest is Stoneleigh, which is just down the road. My biggest one, though, is Epsom. And Epsom these days, when I first moved in, there were bookshops and clothes shops and shoe shops and stuff. Now it's coffee shops and charity shops. That's all there is. And there's empty shop fronts, both within the high street and also within the Ashley Centre, which is our, shopping mall, as it were. All of that is happening at the same time that we've got a national house building crisis, but also a housing crisis. We've got lots and lots of people, hundreds of thousands of people who have no homes to go to. With a flash of a pen, Rishi Sunak or Michael Gove or one of those arse hats could say, actually, we're going to convert all of these office blocks, shops, or whatever it might be, into housing. But they don't. But to see Canary Wharf turned into prime riverfront real estate, I wouldn't be at all surprised. The only problem, of course, is who gets to live there. Imagine, I mean, my dad grew up in Bermondsey. His dad was a docker for a while, and the docks, the London docks, Tobacco Dock, Imperial Wharf, St Catherine's Dock, they were about as rough as London got back in the day. And I mean that Mick, I know that's your part of the world, but they were, what is the expression? As rough as a badger's arse. They really were rough as anything. And then come the 80s, come yuppiedom, come Canary Wharf, it suddenly became the most desirable place in London to live. And where you had people that were barely affording the rent on their council house on one side of the road, we have now had £1 million apartments opposite on the other side of the road. So the potential conversion of Canary Wharf into residential, is that going to be a benefit to the local people? Or is that going to be benefit to the big property developers who will sell those high-rise apartments? And Canary Wharf is a fantastic building. Sell those high-rise apartments at tens of millions of quids. I know where I think that one's going. So saying that, says Mick, they have pulled a few of the buildings down after 30 years. Yeah. And listen, I wish I could remember the name of it. I actually went, when I first started writing for Contract Journal, one of the reasons I had a bit of an issue with alcohol, let us leave it at that. When I joined Contract Journal, it was 1987. And this was at the absolute height of the building boom in London's Docklands. So virtually every day or every other day, I was being invited to a topping out ceremony, quaffing champagne, eating caviar on the roof of a newly finished building, while some local dignitary cut a piece of ribbon. And I took a few photographs and gradually lost the will to live in bottles of champagne. As I say, that's one of the reasons that I don't drink anymore. But I know of at least one building that I saw topped out in probably 89 that has now been and gone. I have outlived a building, effectively. Dan Cullen says, you can never understand how they call it affordable housing. How is 3K a month for a one-bed flat affordable, or 300K two-bed house affordable? You need 40 or 50K in your bank to get a mortgage. Not affordable. Look at my situation, Dan. I've got 4 kids. My eldest daughter has moved out, lives in a rented house. But my other 3 kids, 2 of whom, my twins, are 30, and Fred is 28, and they still live at home. By the time I was Fred's age, I was married, had a mortgage, and had 3 children, because the twins came along. No sign of my children being able to do that because of exactly that. do we end up like America where virtually everyone rents? I wonder. Do we end up in a situation where it is just not feasible for you to necessarily remain living in the area where you grew up? If my son and his girlfriend decided to up sticks and move to Yorkshire, perhaps, or I don't know, somewhere else, somewhere way up north, they could probably afford to buy a place with relative ease. But they can't here. So what does that do to families ultimately? And I know we're going off subject here, but what does that do to families? The only way that my son can afford to put a roof over his and his girlfriend's head is to move hundreds of miles away from his home. That doesn't make any sense. People, I think we've probably talked this one out. I was only expecting this to last an hour and 16 and counting. What's Mick got to say? We digest. I've said this once and I'll say it again. I'm glad I'm out of it all. But I do still have a bit when I'm asked. Have to be honest, the effing paperwork is a bind. And therein lies, when you think about it, when you really think about where we've got to, I will come back to that one, Gary. Where we've got to as an industry. We've had 50 years, probably 50 years of the Health and Safety at Work Act, but people still die and are still maimed within the demolition industry. We've got accreditation of companies, but companies still go bust. We've got financial controls and legal controls, but companies are still demonstrably corrupt. How far have we actually come? How far have we actually come in the last 20, 30, 40 years? If men and women are still dying on site, and if companies are still corrupt, how far have we actually come as an industry? I said I'd address it. I'm going to. Is the NFDC fit for purpose? It's fit for a purpose. I don't think it's fit for this purpose. If you want to meet up with your peers and your competitors on a regular basis, to have a very expensive beer in a very expensive hotel, and to potentially win a trophy that says that you are the best at what you do, even though 3/4 of the industry weren't allowed to compete, then the NFDC is the place to be. If, however, you are looking for guidance, if you are looking for support, backup, leadership, and a unity that allows you to tell Build UK where to poke it, to tell the government where to poke it, to tell the Environment Agency where to poke it. If you're looking for that, then don't go to Hemel Hempstead, because that's not there. Mick very quickly says, the answer, Gary, is no, it is not. Go on, say it. It's the old boys club. That, you see, there was always that criticism, even when I was working with the NFDC, there was always that criticism. And, there's always been a degree of truth to that. Make no bones about it. When I was there before and subsequently, I think there was a degree of that. But I think there is the old way of looking at an old boys club, where it was filled with old boys, veterans of the industry and that kind of thing, it was okay. Wasn't perfect, but it was okay. You know, the likes of your Sid Hunts and your Claude Browns and people of that ilk. But the old boys club of today it's just a boys club. Yes, there are a few ladies in it, but it is just a boys club. And you know, you go to some of their meetings and you know people turn up primarily because there's a bar there afterwards. You know, that at the beginning, because it's an AGM, at the beginning of every AGM, there is, you know, the minutes of the previous meeting have been discussed. And for them to be accepted into record, they have to be accepted and then seconded by somebody. And it's usually the same faces. Yeah, I agree. Yes, I second, and so on down the line. At the AGM, there's 200, 300 people sat in the room. I reckon no more than about 10 of them have actually read the minutes of that meeting. Nobody ever does. The main reason that a lot of people are members of the NFDC is to get their logo on their letterhead and on their website. And the second reason is to get together every once in a while and go out on a bender. Again, if that's what you're looking for, look no further. You have the perfect solution. Just look up NFDC or demolition-NFDC on the interwebs, sign up, pay your money, and you'll be invited along to all their shindigs and happy days. If, however, you are looking for some kind of leadership that is going to change the industry, you ain't going to find it there. You're just not. I can't even remember the last time they issued a guidance note. I can't remember the last time they stood up and fought on behalf of the industry. I can't remember the last time they made a decision that would be to the benefit of the wider sector. If anything, they've gone the other way. I've mentioned this before on the Breakfast Show, and I'll mention it again. You know, I was involved in the writing of two. I wasn't the primary writer, but I was a co-author of a couple of sets of guidance notes for the NFDC. And at the time, not only were we giving them away to members, but they were freely available on the website, because the feeling was that if we made all of these things available to everybody within the industry, slowly but surely we would raise standards across the industry. What is the expression? A rising tide raises all the boats, or something like that. That was the feeling. That has since been replaced by, let's put all the guidance notes behind a paid firewall, so the only people that get to see them are those that are actually members. In other words, if you're a paying member, we want you to be all safe and sound and looked after and cared for and nurtured. If you're not a paid member, we don't really care about your safety. You're on your own. Is that the voice of an industry? Dan Kahn says the paperwork involved is another thing. Where is the technology in all of this? Why has it not changed? I think it's coming. You know, and I've been on lots of sites with fingerprint recognition and retina recognition to gain access. I've seen all the site paperwork now on iPads and stuff like that. I've seen the results of drone surveys. Some of the explosive demolition people are now using 3D animations to plan and plot how a building's going to fall and so on down the line. But that is the upper echelons. You know, is Joe Blogg's demolition getting into drones and 3D animations? Probably not. Probably not. Will they ever have a chance? Maybe. The rise of inflation rates, our plant getting expensive is not helping, as they all want a hand in your pocket too. Yeah. And listen, bearing in mind, you know, inflation is beyond the control of us. It's beyond the control of the plant manufacturers, and it is seemingly beyond the controls of both the banks and the economists of the world. Inflation happens. Like shit, it happens. That's the way it is. But all coming at once, you know, cost of living crisis, fuel shortages, and then fuel price hikes, materials price hikes, insurance goes up, wages go up, the cost of equipment goes up, the cost of equipment maintenance goes up, and so on down the line. Or all of a sudden, like I said earlier, your 2, 3, 4% margin just went. You didn't even get to stroke that little margin. It's gone before you've even got your hands on it. No one sticks together in these situations, and it's making it worse by trying to put other companies out of business. I'm going to say goodbye to Mick, who says, good to chat. Get some sleep, mate. Catch you later, gents, and stay safe. Thank you very much indeed, Mick. Thank you for your contribution, and I'm glad you got your sound back. I'm going to leave you with I didn't mean for this to be an anti-NFDC rant, and I hope it hasn't been, because that wasn't the intention. But I'm going to leave you with a thought. Back in 2008, it was 2008, may have been 2009, but it was recession time, and Dave Darcy of Erith Contractors was the incumbent president of the NFDC at the time when the recession hit. Terribly unfortunate. In my personal opinion, the best NFDC president of my tenure with the NFDC. He was just the right mix of smart and hard-nosed. He had the lot. Okay, so it was very unfortunate that his presidency coincided with such a long and deep recession. And I was in a meeting once where there was a suggestion of fining a couple of NFDC members over some minor infraction, and I don't even think it was like demolition related. I think it was just membership related, and there was talk about fining them. And Dave Darcy, who did this a lot, I have to say, I learned a lot from Dave, and I miss speaking to him a lot. He's still with us, by the way, but I just don't speak to him anymore. But I learned a lot from Dave, and one of the things I learned was there was probably 10, 12, possibly even 15 people all sat around the table, and there was a lot of shouting and swearing, and they should be fined, they shouldn't be fined, I think they, and all of this kind of thing. And Dave, as the president, sat at the end of the table, just silently, just took it all in, listened to all the arguments, listened to the pros, listened to the cons, weighed it up. And when everybody had finally settled down, he just said, gentlemen, we are in the midst of recession. Rather than fining each other, I think we should be putting our arms around each other's shoulders. We find ourselves in that position again. I am not seeing any arms going around the shoulders. I'm not seeing anybody suggesting that that is a way forward. We talk a big talk about mental health, and it's good to talk and it's good to share and all that. Is that not the role of an organization like the NFDC to bring its members together and say, look, fellas, times are hard. We're all in the same boat. Let's all huddle together for warmth, and let's see what we can do to make sure that we all make it out of this alive. Is that not their role? Gary Muirhead says, fantastic chat as always, Mark. Just hope it hasn't come too late. My feeling is that it's certainly come too late for one. And I'm fairly sure that will all come out in the wash in the not too distant future. Hopefully I hope it's given a few people a bit of food for thought. I hope. I can't bail you out personally, because listen, I'm as potless as the rest of them. But if anybody is out there and they're struggling, and I'll say the same to you as I say about mental health. Set aside the fact that I'm a journalist. I will turn off the tape recorder. I will put down the pen and the notepad, and you have my word. I'll even sign a contract to this effect. If you are struggling at the moment and you want somebody to talk to, even if that means that I do a bit of free publicity in the hope of getting some more work through your door, call me. I'm a man of limited means and very, very, very limited talent. But what I am good at is getting the name out there. If that would help you at this point in time, if you are struggling for work and if you would like a bit of guidance or assistance in that direction, pick the phone up. You know where to find me. Dan Cullen says, fantastic chat, very informative, a great idea, well done. I had a good idea at 4 o'clock in the morning. Most of the decisions I've made in my life in the past at 4:30 in the morning have been very, very bad. Very, very bad indeed. They've not turned out well. This one, not bad at all. Gentlemen, it's been a I am tired, and we did have the bereaved daughter of the guy killed up at Longanet on the show this morning. So I am a little bit emotionally squiffy at the moment. But thanks for being here. It was short notice. You didn't get a great deal of warning that we were going to do this. Thanks for your input. I said this earlier when I was talking about the poor guy that lost his life at Longanet. You know, you are, and I am to a lesser degree, hairy-ass demolition people and construction people. But I do believe that our collective heart is in the right place. So thanks for that, guys. Dan Cullen says, I was in the shower at 4 a.m. You should have given me a call. We could have... Well, I was sat with a cup of coffee in my hand. A cup of tea, actually. Can't drink coffee at 4 o'clock in the morning. It would keep me awake. We will have no fighting in here. This is the war room. You get the idea. People, I'll be back at 10 o'clock tomorrow, hopefully with some good news. Wouldn't that be nice? I don't know what form that will come in, but I will be keeping my fingers crossed. Everybody go and have a fantastic afternoon and evening. It's been a pleasure. I'll see you all soon. Thanks very much indeed for watching. All the best.